This is for the nerds, this is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back, you ain't gonna touch me, you not gonna do nothing, you are not above me, I bet you wish you was me, I know that I know. Nerds, this is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back, I know that I know.
That guy's a fucking legend, man. I'm just saying, man. Like, it's one thing. It's like, it's ironic, right? Because he's clearly concerned about his health.
Is he though?
Like,
I think it's just a social norm at this point. Like, you don't want to be the one singled out.
Yeah, it's like he's clearly concerned about, not passing on the virus, but he's not concerned with intaking the cancer.
Sure.
And I commend him, bro. I mean,
that was honestly my reaction initially when people were shining a big light on COVID. Was everybody was taking these precautionary measures to not get it and everything else. And, my understanding of it, like in early January or whatever, is like, if you fit in this healthy group, you're pretty safe. I was like, we know cancer's a thing. Mm-hmm. And none of you are taking precautionary measures not to get that. So it seems pretty crazy that something that has flu-like symptoms is going to have you boarded up.
Let's not take it that far, Burke. I know you and I had some conversations about flu-like symptoms. I think it's a little bit more than flu-like symptoms,
No, it's not.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't think it's just like, it's fine. It's just the flu.
For people that aren't at threat, that is what it is.
Not everybody, Burke. You don't know if you're
We're having two different conversations here.
Yeah. No, we're having the same conversation. We're just on two different paths. You don't know if you're a threat until you have it.
We're saying the same thing.
Okay.
If you aren't susceptible or high risk, it's a flu.
Yeah. I'm saying you don't know if you're high risk until you've got to that risk part.
Okay.
Yeah, that's scary.
I mean, that's true of everything, right?
Mm.
Like, you don't know if you're going to die from the flu till you die from the flu.
Yeah, so it's better to just take precautionary measures and not get the flu.
Well, we have a vaccine.
The whole vaccine talk. That's a whole, show. We're going to do a whole show on vaccines.
I don't think we are. There's not much to say.
I don't know, man. I don't know. So what are your thoughts now that we've released people to the flu?
I mean, I think there's going to be a second wave. I think it will come earlier than previously expected. I think the initial expectation was going to be fall, but I imagine just the escalation of things with the protests that we're going to see a second wave probably midsummer. I don't know what that means. Most of the data is pointing to COVID just not being nearly as deadly as we expected it to be, at least outside of the fringes. Obviously the fringe cases where people are high risk are still at very high risk. But, from everything I understand, the phasing moving forward is going to be such that if you fall into the high risk category, you do the best you can to isolate yourself. And, basically the high risk category will be the one quarantined, and the rest of America will, I guess, scale towards herd immunity. But it seems like we're pretty far away from that as well. So I honestly don't know. But, either we did a really great job of social distancing, which by and large, I think we probably did, but we didn't do that great of a job locking down. Like, the country wasn't locked down by any stretch. So, I think the data is a little bit still out, kind of conflicting.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to get good data because we didn't have enough testing. So it was one of those things where it's like, there's not enough testing. We don't know how many people actually have it. We don't know how many people are asymptomatic. We don't really know what's going on. We do know that there's a lot of deaths, and we do know that a lot of people contracted it.
Well, the deaths are, yes, there's a lot, but it's far lower than previously predicted, like significantly lower. I think it was something like sub 1% had died in America. Now, granted, that's within the scope of testing, right? So there's probably far more infected than we realize, and may or may not be The death toll is difficult to know because the way they collect the data is like did they count George Floyd as
No, that was a homicide.
right, but allegedly he had COVID. So does it get you know what I mean? Like, and he died of asphyxiation, or you know, the autopsy says he didn't. It was complications.
Right.
So like, does that now get qualified as a COVID death? And you know, I don't think that's very clear.
What about poker? Do you think that I see all the games running at Venetian? The Golden Nugget just opened up. People are swarming back as if, like, very similar to online. It was like, oh, there's like a wave of online. Now there's like a wave of live poker where it's just like, all of a sudden it's like Venetian's running 50, 100 no limit hold'em. It's like, what's going on?
I mean, it's only 5 people, and that game had been running underground for like the last month. So, you know, it's no surprise that they're going to go to a safer haven where they don't stand to get robbed or have any existential threats, right? Like, you're always going to want a casino to facilitate the game. The rake is lower, and it's obviously much, much safer. But yeah, finding 5 or 10 guys that are going to play live at higher stakes, not shocking. People follow the money, man.
You going?
No. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I've never been fearful of getting COVID.
Tell us more. I know that part.
I just, you know, it's just like I don't have a fear of driving or flying. I don't think that my risk factor is very high. But I am conscientious that there are people in my group that fall under high risk, and I obviously don't want to like shut myself out from being around them. So it's easy for me to quarantine. Online's going well right now. Like,
I feel like you quarantine even when there is no quarantine, Berk.
I don't think that's entirely true, but I definitely don't like go out of my way to be hanging out on the strip on a Friday night.
When's the last time you went to the club, Berk?
Who knows? 10 years ago. Hopefully longer.
The club was weird. I feel like you go through phases, right? Like when you're young, the club is cool.
It was never cool.
For me, the club was super cool. I'll tell you a funny story, bro. The club was wild in New York City. I was 20 years old. One of my friends lent me his ID to get into the club, right? Go in the club, 20 years old. I was like, oh, this is the most lit thing ever, right? All right. Go in the club, start dancing with some shorty, right? She's kind of cool, whatever. So then...
You guys had a conversation, you determined she was cool?
I mean, we didn't have like a full-blown conversation. Like, her group was next to my group on the dance floor.
Okay.
Right? It was like Headsprung by LL Cool J. It was something popping. Right?
That's not who sings Headsprung. I should know that.
No, Headsprung LL Cool J, for sure.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, for sure. Then she's like, she sees me, I see her. We're like, yo, that's what's up. So then we go off to the side a little bit. We start dancing. That's cool. Then she has like a booth, right? So we go to the booth. She ends up kissing me, right? And we're like making out a little bit, whatever. Then she's like, oh, my husband's on the way, right? So I look straight, right? It's like this like 6'5" black dude who's like clearly gonna kill me, I think, right? I'm shook. I'm calling my boys, like my gang. I'm like, yo, cuckoo. Like, you know, like get over here right now, right? Like, because I think it's about to pop off, right? So he comes, and I'm like, holy shit, why'd I come to this club? I'm not even supposed to be here. Like, my whole life is flashing before my eyes. I'm like getting ready to like fight. So he comes, and he's like, yo, what's up? And I'm like, what's up? He looks me dead in the eye, and he's like, it's cool, we're swingers. And I'm like, holy shit. So then I look at my boys and I'm like, nah, it's cool. That was my first time in the club. And after that, I always wanted to go back because I didn't know what was going to happen.
Sure.
Sure. That was my first time in the club. That shit was kind of popping, though. That shit was crazy. Anyway, I think I might go to XS when it opens.
Conrad will go with you.
I don't know about all that.
Conrad finds a way in for free every day.
Bro, I've seen Conrad play a hand and go to the club and come back for the next hand. It's wild. I don't understand. All right. I do want to take a little bit, we're trying to be a little bit of a lighter mood today. But I do want to talk about Corona until we move on to something else, as well as like why I think people don't necessarily like, they're just like tired of it. You know, like they're tired of like the whole like wash your hands and like all the hand sanitizer and like how much toilet paper we need. But anyway, let's go to this video from it's going to be revolving Arizona, which is one of the states that reopened. And I want to look at the statistics revolving Arizona. And I think it'll give us a little bit of an insight into what's possible and what maybe we should be expecting. So let's cut to this video from Arizona.
Arizona hospitals have been told to activate their emergency plan to prepare for extra beds and staff as coronavirus cases and hospitalizations soar to their highest numbers yet. The state health director, Kara Christ, sent this letter Sunday to hospitals telling them, quote, "Your continued ability to care for your patients in a safe manner is critical," adding that they should prepare their surge capacity beds, making arrangements to get more PPE and ensure they have enough staff. COVID-19 modelers calculated a spike would likely happen after these stay-at-home orders lifted on May 15th.
I don't know, man. I don't know about you, but I'm shook. I'm not like, I think we were already like this. Like, did we open too early? Is this what's happening? Like,
I don't think that that's a viable way of looking at it. Like, I think all we can do is, work in coordination with other nations that have already gone through it, utilize the ones that were most successful as examples, and try to move on from there. I don't know what Arizona's reopening policy was, but it seems like the phasing is the best way. Although judging by Vegas right now, maybe that's not actually going to be a thing. All I know is like all these precautionary measures that seem to be taken upon reopening seem to be unnecessary in the sense that they're not helpful, right? Like 5-handed poker versus 9-handed poker probably doesn't make much of a fucking difference. And, putting up these random sneeze guards at blackjack tables or whatever. Like, I mean, I imagine that this is all for optics and to make people feel safer. But the reality is that their likelihood of contracting is probably still the same. And, for the vast majority, they're going to fall under the bucket of a carrier, not somebody who's of high risk of getting like deathly ill. But at the same token, if you have millions of carriers and tens of thousands of people who are high risk that will die, that extrapolates pretty quickly. So I don't really know what the answer is outside of a vaccine. It does seem like we could be more prudent in, I guess, exercising the non-necessities. Like dine-in restaurants aren't a necessity. You can still just do takeout, and you should. Casinos, I don't know what to say because like they're the lifeblood of Vegas. Without them, I don't know how long we last. We don't have state tax. So it's like most of that is coming through the casinos, and with them being on full-blown shutdown, it's tough. But the problem is now we become the epicenter of kind of like disease.
yeah, it's a hot spot.
People fly in, they fly out, they take it with them, they give it to their elders, whatever.
It's like Florida. Did you see? So in Florida, they track people's phone. Like, I don't know, some CIA shit, but they did it through Bluetooth. And what happened is during spring break, they like saw the people that came into like Fort Lauderdale, Miami Beach, all these people, and then when spring break finished, they saw where all these people went. And this was like during the shutdown. In fact, they just didn't obey it. So all these people came in, interacted together on the beach, and then spread back to their respective homes. And when you saw where they were all over America.
Yeah.
So I think that's exactly what's going to happen in Vegas. It's like everybody comes to Vegas, gambles, have fun, go to the club, meet some swingers. Then they go back home and they're back with their wives. And like, that's crazy. I don't know, man. I think it's a brain. I saw this article and it was like brain caution fatigue, where it's like you're just tired of having to like wash your hands a million times, having to do all these things and eventually you just like get tired. And then I ended up finding a clip of like brain caution fatigue, and I wanted to play it for you, see what your thoughts are. So let's go to this brain caution fatigue clip.
Caution fatigue is the experience of low motivation or energy to comply with safety guidelines. Initially, you may have been energized and positively focused on the gains of following pandemic safety behavior. But as the virus has continued and the safety measures are prolonged, we're starting to focus on the negative and feel physically and mentally depleted.
I am not letting my guard down. If anything, it's going up. At the very beginning, you think, wait, this isn't really happening. We're in this big sci-fi movie. Well, it really is happening. I have moments, quite honestly, where it's like, okay, enough already, enough. But then you just go about your business.
I can continue for as long as it takes. I'd rather be living, wearing a mask and gloves than have to bury someone or someone have to bury me.
You basically want to try to figure out the trade-offs of what are you winning versus what you're losing.
Using hand sanitizer everywhere you go. It is quite a bit overwhelming, but I know the importance of it.
I'm still trying to figure out what her mask was saying. Like, Bakisha? What to say? I was like intent on like figuring it out. I was like, what does it say? And I know it started with a B, and I know there was a K, but I don't remember the rest of it. She was, I don't know.
Like cursive, man.
I think it was.
I barely know how to write in cursive.
I think it was her gang. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that? I feel like that's true. Like at some point, you just get tired. Like people want to live a normal life.
Well, I think it doesn't help that the data is not really supporting all these movements, right? Like it seems like she talked a lot about the payoff matrix at the end of like, what are you winning versus what are you risking? And a lot of the data is basically saying that these are nominal gains. So effectively, if you can't get everyone to comply, the benefits are negligible. And at that point, it becomes such a massive inconvenience to the group that those who are complying are just basically taking on unnecessary stress for almost no positive gain.
Is that how you feel?
I mean, I feel that way in the sense that it's an all or nothing proposition. I don't necessarily feel that way in the sense that I think it's useless or unnecessary. I think that these protocols are put in place for a reason, and they probably do have big benefits to them when you can get mass compliance. But I don't think we're anywhere. I mean, we can't agree on anything in this nation.
Do you think at the end of the day, the mayor of Las Vegas ended up winning this argument?
No, I don't think so. She was just still too early. Like, even if she somehow lands on the right side of history, like 3 years from now, we find out that this disease wasn't very deadly. I don't think that she gets to say like, see, I told you, we should have just opened up. We crippled our economy for no good reason. Like, that's crazy. We are only operating off limited information of what we have available now. And the information she has available is the same information all of us have available. And none of it points to the fact that we should just wide scale open back up and let people get sick.
I'm still concerned over the fact that I don't know the difference now between like a phase 1 open and a phase 4 open, because it seems like this phase 1 open is just an open. Like,
well, Vegas definitely seems to be different.
It's just like, we're just open. Like,
I mean, the casinos make it so, right? Like the casinos are unlike almost anything else nationwide. So, and also the protest advanced things a lot, right? We basically have a test case in all of these protesters because they're in mass crowds. I mean, this is going to probably be what determines how sports scale moving forward. We're just going to see like what the uptick is with all the mass protesting.
I think there has to be an uptick.
6 to 10 weeks. Yeah, but how significant, right? Because we saw hundreds of thousands of people protesting. And if it only moves the needle a couple %, then maybe it's not that big of a deal.
But a couple % of like all the millions of people that are in this country, it's a lot of people.
Yeah, but again, you have to... We have to get back to the crux of all this, right? All right, let me ask you a question. Do you think that the reason all these precautionary measures are being taken place is because of the risk of people dying or the risk of depleting our medical resources?
I mean, they go hand in hand, though. You deplete the resources, more people die.
Yes, but that wasn't the way I was phrasing the question. People dying of COVID or because we run a risk of depleting resources?
I think it's the first one first.
It's not. It's the latter, right?
Okay, go ahead.
The fact that people could potentially die from a flu doesn't make that big of a difference to the nation as a whole. Again, if we're looking at 1% death rates, that's in line with what we would see with the flu, or 0.1%, whatever it is. In any event, the reason why this is being taken so seriously is because there's no preemptive measures that can be taken since it's asymptomatic. There's no vaccine in place that can prevent wide-scale spread. But most importantly, what we're trying to avoid happen is medical resources being depleted to the point where now people with treatable diseases can't be treated and they die, right? Because that's where it becomes a crime upon humanity, when medical attention isn't viable for the everyman, right? People dying from the flu is a thing. It's just going to happen. That's not what all this preventive measure, in my opinion, is being taken for. It may be framed that way in order to tactically get people to comply. But the fact of the matter is, what we're really concerned about is the infrastructure of our medical resources and not collapsing them from the top down, right? We want people to still have healthy pregnancies. We want people to still be able to recover from wounds or brutal injuries or other illnesses that will require the resources of a hospital being able to turn their attention to that. And if we're just littered with COVID patients that vary from life-threatening to inconveniently sick, but there's no way to really tell the difference on the onset, everything just crumbles.
How many kids do you think will be named COVID
I hope 0.
I
It's not going to be 0.
COVID's kind of a cool name though. It's like,
Is it?
it's like young COVID. It's like,
Is it?
like COVID Berkey? I could see it.
No.
You don't think so? I think people are going to be named COVID. For sure.
Were people named mumps and measles?
It's just
Like,
not
what
as,
are you
doesn't
talking
sound as
about?
cool though. But I'm sure there's
SARS? Do you think there's a kid out there named SARS?
Hell yeah. At least his nickname is definitely SARS. Like, for sure. I mean, look, he's going to be named COVID because he was like made during COVID, you know, and then it's going to be fine, bro.
I'd like to meet the kid out there named HIV or AIDS.
I'm going to look it up. Don't make me look it up, bro. Come on, man. Like it's just cool.
Look, I get it. People are stupid, but this is next level.
I take the over on one kid being.
Yeah, obviously. I'll take the over on one on anything.
Oh man. All right. Did you watch the Oprah show?
I did. Yeah.
What'd you take? What's your overall feeling on the Oprah show? Like not analysis, just what'd you think? Like,
I thought it was great. I mean, it was the call to arms that I was asking for, to display a lot of very intelligent, prominent members of the Black community. But I think it did have a couple of issues.
Yeah.
First, I don't think it's widespread enough. Like, I just don't think people were tuning into Oprah's network.
I mean, it's on YouTube today.
Great.
Yeah.
People will see it secondhandedly, maybe, but also long form content just doesn't perform all that well. But in any event, that aside, I love the idea of a panel. I hate the way that it was done.
Me too. Let me explain why.
Okay.
Now, for sure, I know the myth. You know the myth of Oprah's house, right?
Mm-mm.
You don't know the myth of Oprah's house? Nobody's allowed into Oprah's house except one person.
Okay.
Maya Angelou.
Okay.
Look,
Okay.
that's true. And it's a fact because yesterday she had the opportunity to have a panel in her house and they all webcammed in. So
Yeah.
clearly it's a fact now. Like I am convinced that no one's allowed in Oprah's house unless it's Maya Angelou.
Sure.
And now the whole world knows because she could have had a panel. She could have had it's Oprah, man. She could have had everyone behind the screen in her house. She could have flew people in. She could have given all of them a Civic and threw them all in her house and said, you stand there, you stand there, you stand there. Instead, she was like, no, Maya Angelou's upstairs. You can't come inside. And that's it. Now sit behind that webcam and I'll put you up on the bigger screen when it's your turn to talk. And now we get to talk about it.
Yeah, I thought the quality was poor. I think that, like, I don't care that they weren't there, but every one of them should have had a camera. Like, it should have been pretty standardized. Every one of them should have been mic'd. Every one of them should have been had a camera. Like, it wouldn't have been that hard to pull off. The production quality was relatively low. It was tough in that regard. But more importantly, due to the fact that it was just a Zoom call, and it was done in a manner where there weren't many lower thirds, it just wasn't a good production. Everybody kind of blended in. I'm not familiar with these people, right? So the people that stood out to me were the people who interested me upon their introduction the most, right? So it's like, there was I can't recall her name, but she was a politician, maybe a mayor or a governor. Well, the mayor of Atlanta was there.
Yeah.
But it was this other one that I had recently saw her on maybe one of the late night shows. I can't recall. But anyway, like, they interest me the most because I obviously already had some inclination as to who they were. I've heard them speak before. And now I'm like just waiting for them to talk. But it was very hard to follow. She would pose a general question and, direct it at somebody, and it's just jumping back and forth from person to person. And I'm not really getting a unified message here, right? I'm just getting each individual account of like what's been happening. And honestly, like from that vantage point, what resonated with me the most is it was super emotional, right? Like, it was basically 2 hours of just hearing the hurt and pain of a particular community and how much this, I guess, protest or celebration of George Floyd's death, maybe that's the wrong phrasing for it, whatever, this whole event that's taking place right now is just kind of like a cry for change. And like that, I understand and I resonate with, but it seemed like a great opportunity to platform these people and dig a lot deeper to the point where I could hear a strong call to action. Like, that was the whole framing of last night. It's like, well, what do we do now? Right. I think even the title was like,
where do we go next?
Yeah. Where do we go next? Or something like that. And I didn't walk away with that answer. Like, I didn't feel any more knowledgeable.
Well, part 2's today. So I'm going to pass on your recommendations to Oprah, and I'm sure that things will be better for you today.
Right.
But I do have a list of people that she did have on. But before we even get to that, there was this one major clip that started going viral from Kimberly Jones. And she's just like expressing what a lot of people feel. So because this video went viral and it was also showcased to Oprah on the show, I do want to play it for all of you. And this is Kimberly Jones on the screen.
It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own, by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood, and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contracts, and they are lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
So I think that hit home with Oprah. A lot of the people were saying like, "Oh, Oprah, I know you don't curse. I know you don't like the cursing," and so they bleeped out the cursing a little bit for Oprah. But she said, this is true, and effectively, she thinks that. I think the phrasing that Kimberly used there is really important. So, not revenge, but equality, and I think a lot of people can appreciate that, and I think a lot of people like Van Jones and have said, I think we're kind of lucky that like the black community has been pretty patient as well. Like, they're both patient and they don't want revenge. I think I wouldn't be surprised if, like people say like, we should get some revenge on all these people that mistreated us for so long. What was your takeaway on Kimberly Jones there?
So I think obviously that's accurate, but the other thing is that revenge is difficult to enact whenever you are a 5-to-1 minority. So like there just isn't the numbers. And this is the same problem that persists with having sweeping change at a governmental level. It's like they're just very, very powerful. Van Jones is actually in a documentary on Netflix called The 13th. And it's about the 13th Amendment, the abolishment of slavery, and how it was really just reframed more so than abolished. Basically, there is this clause that says, nobody shall be enslaved with the exception of criminals.
Correct.
And, that just leads to the entire over-criminalization of mainly minorities, but if we want to make it a socioeconomical conversation, of the impoverished. And, it's a fascinating film to watch because though it has racial undertones and it's very clear where it systemically begins, it really has morphed and evolved into big business and has a lot of, money behind it. And it really is attacking the impoverished in the nation.
I think you got next week's topic, Burke. I think that we're going to do for-profit prisons.
I don't think I'm qualified.
I mean, you're a smart guy. Your whole business is about making profit on decisions.
Sure. But I don't think that personally I am just going to pick up on something that I'm recently learning more about and suddenly come up with hey.
John Oliver does it every week.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't solve shit. He doesn't solve a thing. He just entertainingly educates me ever so slightly more about the world's ails.
And this is what the people want you. They don't want you to completely solve it. They just want you to solve for why it's happening. See what I did there?
Sure. I did. I think we know why. I don't think the why is the issue here. I think now it becomes an issue of how can we have systemic change when there's such a massive disconnect between both wealth equality and the power dynamics that come along with that.
I want to move over to Stacey Adams. She talks a little bit about the disproportion with COVID of the Black people, minorities versus the white people. She was the author of Our Time Is Now, New York Times bestseller. I think we'll be there one day, hopefully. Let's play Stacey Adams. I think.
But let's also not forget that of the 110,000 people who have died in this country this year from COVID-19, a disproportionate number are Black. When we talk about 40 million people losing their jobs, a disproportionate number are Black. And when we talk about access to healthcare, a disproportionate number of those who are suffering in their homes from COVID-19, or worse, who are going to their jobs, being exposed to people who do not care about their lives, are Black people.
I think that's unfortunate because like the disproportion I think is like when we're talking about health now, like now we're talking about more than just like economics and racism and all these things, but it's like these people are just dying at a higher frequency and they're saying like this is what we're talking about. Like we don't get a fair shake in anything. Even when there is a pandemic, we suffer more. And I think a lot of people say like, oh, maybe you're just like predisposed, you have higher diabetes and all these things. And we spoke about this earlier. It's like, they if the argument is like they have higher type 2 diabetes, well, why is that? Because that comes from a certain intake of food, probably lower priced food, less nutritionally dense, that of which is just cheaper, that of which they can afford. So it goes like pretty far down this rabbit hole. But I wanted to ask you, like, this disproportion of COVID, what's your take on it before we close the COVID talk?
I mean, it's the same conversation we've been having, right? This is a socioeconomic one. There's wealth inequality, and poor people are going to be heavily affected by something like this for a few reasons. One, they don't have access to as much medical care as people with money. Two, they're forced to take all of the grunt work jobs that have to persist through a pandemic in order to make ends meet. So they're going to be more exposed and less protected. And then three, even if they aren't working, they still have to rely upon community in order to survive. So collectively, they're all going to be heavily exposed to one another. And again, doubling back, they don't have the proper medical care in order to survive. So they don't have the luxury of quarantining effectively. And when I say they, I'm saying impoverished people. Like, this isn't specifically a race issue. It just disproportionately affects minorities because of a lot of other systemic issues we have in place.
And I do want to talk about that. So the last clip was Nicole Hannah-Jones. She is a Pulitzer winner and the founder of the 1619 Project. She's going to talk about effectively the wealth gap, which is like what we're talking about now. So let's play Nicole's Hannah-Jones video.
This is really a time where we can expand on Black economic inequality. And that's fundamentally what we need to be addressing. There was some devastating data that came out earlier this week that said Black Americans' wealth has been stagnant for 70 years. That it would take the combined wealth of 11 and a half Black families to equal the wealth of one white family. And that attending college does absolutely nothing to mitigate that wealth gap. So Black people who do everything right, get a college degree, have less wealth than white Americans who have not even completed high school. So when we look at that type of gap, so much of your crime that we're trying to solve is an issue of poverty. So much of the societal issues that we're having to deal with are issues of poverty. The very reason we had racism and the international slave trade was economic exploitation. The period of Jim Crow, the 100 years of racial terrorism, was a period of economic exploitation. And Black people are dealing with a gap where Professor Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton say there is nothing that Black people can do on their own to mitigate the wealth gap, that we can do everything right and it will not change the wealth gap one bit. We can't just be talking about policing. If we're going to talk about that, we also need to be trying to put forth an economic agenda that would have to include reparations, because there is no way without actually paying reparations to the descendants of those enslaved that we can deal with the economic gap that Black people perennially have 70 years of unchanged wealth, even as Black people have become more middle class, even as Black people have become more educated, our wealth gap remains the same.
Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours.
All right. I think we have, there's Matt Berkey, of course. All right. A couple major points I think I want to touch on. One, she says, it's an 11 and a half to 1 disparity in terms of wealth. That's including Oprah. Like, Oprah is on the Black side. Okay.
Sure.
Like, Oprah is on the Black side. One of the most successful people on the planet. Still 11 and a half to 1. Doesn't matter.
Oh, they're sure there's 11 and a half to 1 white billionaires.
Listen, we're not trying to be logical here. We're just trying to make a fucking point. Okay. It's Oprah, Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods, where he fall?
Lower than Jordan. I don't know why you went to him.
All right. No, but okay. 11 and a half to 1, even if they get college degree, doesn't matter. Even if they do everything right, according to her, doesn't matter. Still 11 and a half to 1, even earning less than people that are white people that just have high school, some of which that don't even finish high school. To close the gap, she mentions effectively like a payment, like paying back, you know. We did that once with the Japanese, with when they were like sent to the camps, and then we paid them like retribution for that. Yeah. What are your thoughts on payment retribution?
I don't know how that played out with the concentration camps, but I imagine not well. Mm-hmm. Effectively, nobody's going to go for that, right? Like, the people who are making the policies are the ones who are at the top of the wealth gap. Mm-hmm. They're not suddenly going to say, like, sure, let me throw some money at the problem. Also, like, though that sounds nice, it's just impractical. We need to figure out a more holistic solution to wealth inequality, because she's not wrong in anything that she says, but it's also not painting the full picture, mm-hmm. right? Like, when you're talking about that lower tier of people living below the poverty line, yes, it may be concentrated towards Black people, but it's all walks of life. And all of them also possess that low ceiling. So it's not like if you're below the poverty line and white, your ceiling is 11.5 times that of a black person who's below the poverty line, right? Like, yes, on average, on the aggregate, you're going to see more prosperity with the people who have the privilege. I agree wholeheartedly with that. And we need to figure out ways to disperse this and make things a lot more level across the board. But when we talk about just forcefully redistributing wealth in that capacity, I think that it's a Band-Aid more than a solution. I don't know what the ultimate outcome is. I think that, progressive policies are looking more in this direction. I think it's, kind of unfortunate we got stuck with Biden as a candidate. I know people, are very taboo on the word socialism and things like that, but at some point we have to counter capitalism, at least slightly, because we've had too many decades of crony capitalism being presented as the American dream and nothing to check or balance that. So I'm not saying that we should implement a socialistic economic policy or anything along those lines. But when you talk about like Yang speaking in terms of UBI or some of the social programs that Bernie Sanders was interested in, it raises the floor, right? It's a lot more important to raise the floor of everybody's well-being than it is to try to increase the ceiling, or even worse, I guess, increase one man's ceiling by lowering another man's. That's true socialism. That's where the issue comes into play, where everybody's going to say, stop, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with you having a greater outlook of prosperity by me limiting mine. We all want to get to the point where we feel limitless, right? What we should all be rallying behind is saying, I'm not okay that your floor is poverty.
Let me ask you some questions as a business owner hat. Let's say, for example, there is another training site owned by a black person, and the whole community starts pushing that training site because that person is black. But that person's, in your opinion, quality of product is not as high as your quality of product. Would you be against that?
Like, what do you mean by would I be against it?
Would you feel as if that person shouldn't deserve the exposure because their product is not high, but they're only getting the exposure because we're in a time
where I understand. They're black? I'm always against marketing ploys that are dishonest, but I wouldn't be against, relative success being distributed. What I'd be against is if there was some sort of like cap put on what I was able to do in order to ensure that another site was able to operate on the level with me, right? So I wouldn't want like restrictions of some sort where it's like, well, you're only allowed to make X amount of content or X amount of dollars or whatever the case may be. Again, I think that this is a framing of, I think people really misunderstand. Like if you look at a lot of like what Sanders' policies were, what Yang was trending towards, Yang specifically, he was very forthright and forward thinking in the sense that he's trying to solve problems that don't yet quite exist, but are inevitable. And all of that is born out of the idea of we need to elevate the floor, right? So these social programs that are attempting to make life a lot more level, it's not making it level in the sense of I want to reduce what you can ultimately achieve and elevate what I'm going to achieve on the aggregate. Instead, what it's saying is I need your support as the 1% to boost me up to the point where I can function and maybe find myself in the middle somewhere, right? So really, I think like all of these platforms are designed to just bring up what the bottom of our impoverished look like? You know what I mean? Like raise the poverty line in essence, ensure that we don't have people living beneath it. And yes, that's going to take a hit to the top a little bit, but it doesn't it doesn't ultimately curb what they're capable of, right? There are no bounds to what Amazon can do. Amazon could eventually suck up every dollar on earth, right? Maybe, probably not. But like potentially speaking, like if it continues its exponential growth, there's a chance that like the world could just effectively be owned by Amazon, right? Now, if we continually increased his tax rate along the way, what's the difference, right? If you end up with all of the pie anyway, what's the difference if you were redistributing 70% of it along the way, right? All you're doing is ensuring that you have a consumer base to continually funnel back into your pie. So like, I don't really see it ever as a limiting growth factor on those who are fast tracked towards the top. Instead, I see it as propping up the bottom to a degree where we have more consumers worldwide, or at least nationwide. We have a higher quality of life, which is what we market this country as, right? It's the American dream.
Because I'm gonna push back only, not because I disagree, but because I think it makes for a good conversation. So, because you made the argument of incentive before, under this premise that you're saying, they're just not incentivized to do that.
Who's they?
Amazon, Apple, Facebook.
It shouldn't be up to them. This should be up to policymakers.
I see.
Right. The problem is that right now with lobbyists and all these other manipulative factors, they have their hands, they being the conglomerates, have their hands too deep into the cookie jar. We talked about this on the podcast earlier this year. I said the winners of COVID were going to be Apple, Facebook, Google, right? I just saw a tweet this morning that said the 5 highest rising stocks in the last 3.5 months: Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft. Shocking.
So why didn't
small businesses?
Everyone should
44% of small businesses went out of business.
That's crazy,
right? This just furthers the gap,
right?
So if that's the case, we have to tether that in some. There has to be. It's not about limiting the growth, right? It's about retarding the growth to a point where it is tethered back so that it can't scale out of control, right? It needs to slow as you start to reach certain heights so that you aren't just vacuuming off the ocean floor. You have to prop up the bottom. And the only way to do that is to have proper social programs, to have a properly funded government that is looking to do. I think the whole concept of small government from an economic standpoint that we've been preaching for the last 50, 60, 70 years is just no longer practical in a country this size that has this much of an income gap. And to be quite frank, we haven't had a small government in decades, right? Like people point to Reagan as being the last one, but even still all the way back to the 80s. This is 1980 he got elected, so 30 or 40 years ago. Even pointing all the way back to that, were we really that small, right? Because like even just watching a little bit of this 13th, I was seeing a lot of like the policy that took place there. I was a baby, so I don't remember. I'm not that studied on it. But even then, a lot of like what was taking place economically was just preying upon these other policies that he was trying to push through, like the war on drugs. Effectively industrializing the prison system. So it was just like, it was almost like a short-term thing where it's like, actually, the government is going into business in a lot of ways in these capacities so that it can continue to incur more revenue.
What's your take on that, on the for-profit prisons?
Obviously, it's a travesty, right? Because it's being manipulated through bureaucratic policy. And what's happening is now privatized business is canoodling with federal government. And they're effectively scratching each other's backs, where they're just both bringing in money hand over fist, and it's the citizens who are taking a bath. So none of that money is being redistributed. It's all being sucked out of the community. And off the back end of it, they're serving time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it's a real shame when it goes into the juvenile system as well, because it's like, you know, these juveniles go to the court and then they just like barely get, like, they shouldn't be sent to a juvenile system. They should be sent to like rehab. They should be sent to some sort of like other form that's not just like snap juvie, snap juvie, snap juvie.
Yeah.
And like now that juvenile system, which is a for-profit system, makes piles of money the longer they're in there.
Sure.
And they're a lot of the times they're supposed to be getting like a probation hearing or something like that every small number of time, and then they just like that gets pushed back. Now the longer they're in there, the more money that gets in. Now that system sometimes has like an under the table deal with the judges, and the judges get paid, and then it's kind of a real shame. I think we have to.
This is why I'm talking about crony capitalism, because effectively what we've built is essentially a mob society where we've employed the federal government to become the mob boss. And like, you know, I don't know enough about crime reform and things of that nature, but when you're talking about juveniles, if they didn't commit some sort of heinous violent crime, I can't fathom putting them in prison.
You think you would have been a good mob boss?
No.
I feel like I would have been a good mob boss.
Maybe.
But like, if you would have been a mob boss, what city you would have been?
I don't know.
I feel like I'm trying to think. Like,
What kind of question is that?
I mean, you have to pick a city. You can't run the country. You have a city.
Sure.
Pick a city, man.
No.
I think I would have been in Philly. I don't know. I feel like a Philly guy. Like, I would have been the mob boss in Philly.
Mm.
All right. I love it. I love making you uncomfortable sometimes.
You know what made me uncomfortable is just your line of questioning is very strange. I don't know what you're trying to pry out of me.
I just want to like, you know, when you hit this is how movies work. I'll tell you. Right.
You're going to tell me.
I'm going to tell you. You know?
Please.
You have a crescendo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you hit a climax. And then like, we already got the climax. We got the whole point of the conversation. Now I have to deflate and then like bring it back down so that people are like, oh, you know, they hit like, oh man, juvenile system is fucking terrible. Then they're like, I agree with you. Then there's nothing more to say. Then there's like,
right.
Deflate, and then rise up again, and then deflate again.
So what's our
It's like having sex more than once.
Okay, sure.
You get it?
Yeah.
That's more your style, right? Like now you kind of see what I'm saying. Now you're like, oh, I got you. You know, big bet Berkey over here. He understands that one. Yo, I'm crazy.
Why are you the one getting red?
Because I understand that too. Do you remember how I started this whole show?
No.
With the swingers?
Oh yeah.
All right. Whew. Man, that was a big one. That was a tough one. All right. So Oprah tonight does it again. What do you want to see?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I want to see more call to action. I want to see, like, I just want to learn. I watch these things to learn. And it's not that I didn't learn anything watching last night. Of course I did. But honestly, it probably doesn't matter what I want to see, to be quite frank. Because I don't think this show is geared towards me specifically. I think that, like, you know, this is an outcry to the Black community, and it's their rally cry. And for that reason, I think that, you know, what I want doesn't really matter. But I guess the whole point I'm trying to make is I still turn on Rogan every day and I see another white dude. And, you know, the riots and the protests are maybe briefly mentioned, but there's just no education behind them at all. There's no call to action. The message is muddled. It's still towing the line between riots are bad and protesting good kind of thing. And it's almost never really addressing like the over policing and how awful that is. And it's just like, yeah, I don't know. I just want to see more. I don't want to see this go away.
Okay.
I don't want to see this turn into a swept under the rug issue where it's just like, this has been plaguing us for 60 years plus.
It honestly doesn't feel like it's going away. Like the protests are still going. And it's like,
yeah,
we don't see them like the numbers are still there. Like the news coverage and the rioting and all that stuff has died down a little bit, but the numbers of people out on the street are still present.
Yeah. And I think that's great. But I still don't know what action is going to be taking place. And like, you know, personally, like, I don't want to hear any more rhetoric out of me. I don't want to hear any more rhetoric out of people like me. Like I get a lot of joy out of watching Trevor Noah because I feel like he's a big voice on this, and I feel like he lends a platform to empower other people to be big voices. I think it's unfortunate that more of that's not coming from the white community. Like, it's not that hard to find somebody promoting the Proud Boys and hearing from a hate group like that. But for some God unknown reason, I'm just not hearing from black leaders. And it's not that they're not speaking. It's not that they're not out there. It's just they're not in the common outlets that I would personally come across.
Like what? Like podcasts?
Yeah, I mean, podcast is the easiest thing to point to because I think it really displays like high intellectuals, right? And there are certain people that we've just given credentials to. But even outside of podcasts, like more documentaries like The 13th, I think. Like that's a fascinating thing. It's easy to get behind. It's easy to watch. Docs are great. The issue with documentaries, obviously, is they're always slanted in some sort of capacity towards bias. But, you know, if you watch it with the vein of do your own research, I think that's really good. I also just think there needs to be more cross debate. And maybe that's why I'm really calling for these platforms, right? Like, I hate Ben Shapiro. I think he is a bad faith actor to the core. I think he is just absolutely toxic in nature. But I would love for him to have somebody of relevance from the black community on there and tell them to their face why they're wrong about economic reform, why they're wrong about police reform, why they're wrong about all these things that he so confidently touts to his echo chamber, right? So I guess like I just want to see way more of that. And I know there's no incentive from one side of this coin to do that, but it's getting bad in the sense that now I see the handful of people who are willing to be weaponized the other direction start to take these platforms and effectively be like a person of color ally, right? So I saw this Rubin report. I've just been trying to watch as much both sides material as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what the Rubin report was or who he was. 3 minutes in, obviously, it's just like this guy has no business having a voice. But he had on this former police officer who's black. And this guy is tied to, her name's Candace something. I can't recall. She's obviously something else in it as well. Anyway, the framework is the Black Lives Movement is garbage, basically. Like it's a false flag. It's inflammatory narrative that is founded really in nothing. And this guy who's being given a platform is basically weaponizing the fact that he's conservative and black. And therefore, the Black Lives Movement doesn't speak for all people of color. It's like, okay, that seems like a reasonable stance for me to start and listen to another side.
Okay.
And then I watched the interview, and this guy just speaks in fallacies the entire way through to basically, from what I can tell, set up a political run of some sort, right? All of his messaging was speaking to middle America, middle white America, basically saying like, no, you're right. They're overreacting. We need police. He's talking about like the problems with drugs and the problems with petty theft and petty crimes and why it's good to be putting all these people. He's basically taking that stance from the 80s of I'll be tough on crime, right? And he's doing it with the leverage of I grew up in the hood. My stepdad was a crack addict who died from a heroin overdose.
I have a black friend.
Right. But like it's way different when you are that black friend, right? So he's displaying this now as I get to be an authority, right? And this is, I put out a tweet and I said like, I see this a lot in the fitness industry, and it's easy to identify there. It's a lot more difficult when you're talking about these sensitive issues because we're not very particular about who we grant authority to. If you have high EQ and know how to speak to a crowd in a slanted way where it's not obvious to them, if you just watch this and you aren't necessarily looking for these fallacies and these biased like points of view that are clearly directing you, you'll look past it.
Well, I mean, the truth is that it's on us too. We want to hear people that are have the viewpoint that we already have,
right?
And then just like cling on to that and say like we're right, and Ben agrees with us.
Exactly.
You know, like, and Ben is smart.
Right.
Ben went
so
to Harvard
that's
Law
what
School.
I mean. This person becomes a point of authority, right? So it's easy to point to this guy. I think his last name was Tatum. It's easy to say like, oh, this guy Tatum agrees with everything that I'm saying, in the sense that, you know, these rioters and looters and protesters are all bad actors, and they're bringing the country down, and black people don't actually have it that bad, and poor people don't actually have it that bad. Where else in the world would you rather be poor than in the United States of America? And, you know, and it's just like, if you listen to the rhetoric that this guy is spewing, it's all founded in nothing, right? It's literally just founded in, I worked the beat and criminals were black, and people deserve to be in jail when they commit crimes. And they lean so heavily on the destruction of property being like one of the most egregious crimes that can be committed.
Right.
And it's just like, what are we talking about here? We're seeing lives get destroyed day in and day out by a myriad of problems, right? Poverty being at the top of the list. So it's just like, to suddenly shift the focus to like, you know, drug addicts deserve to be in jail. I can't tell you how much rhetoric I've seen over the last week. Again, like just actively trying to search the other side, how much stuff I've seen portrayed where it's like, George Floyd was a drug addict. He deserved to die.
Right.
It's like, what if he was a drug addict? Who the fuck cares?
Let me ask you this question, because I think we're starting to see the problems. When it comes to people with platforms, do you find a problem with news in general? Because like, I think a lot of these platforms like Ben Shapiro, all these people, like they're propping up, one, because we're starting to build a new media age, but the news itself, I think, has issues in two parts. One, a lot of people like to look at the CNN versus Fox, right? And what we're looking at is two big giants trying to fight for like the collective thought process, right?
Yeah.
But there's a problem underneath that, right? And the problem underneath that is that there is no more like local coverage of anything, right? And what we're finding is that local coverage tends to uncover most of the big issues, right? So when there is like corruption in the police department, when there is R. Kelly, like that was the Chicago Sun-Times, like when there is the Miami Herald was like another sex offender that was like chilling with my man Trump and shit and on the plane and all that stuff. I don't know what's going on there. But what I'm saying is, the problem with news, do you think it's the two-part problem of like Fox News versus CNN, and now we just need to go and see something else on YouTube? Or is it a systemic problem where it's from the ground up, because we're losing the local news that are often feeding up the food chain, right, to CNN and Fox and things like that? Because we're losing that, do you think that is, one, why we're going to YouTube, and two, why we're losing some of the ability to not be biased?
Well, I think that I think like when you're talking about CNN versus Fox News and things like that, it's not what you're framing it as. They're not trying to speak to the collective. They're trying to speak.
No, they're trying to sway a collective.
No, they're not.
Okay, go ahead.
They're speaking to their echo chamber, and they're trying to catch fringe people who are undecided.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So identity politics are probably the root of most evils in this country. But identity politics exist because we allow so many of these differences to persist in fugazi truths, right? So we don't have third-party independent sources that are willing to flesh out actual truths. Instead, truth is kind of just a commodity, and it's framed by the storyteller in a lot of ways. So I think like active sources like Snopes and Politico and these third-party entities on the internet that are willing to fact check stuff, I think those are they need to be brought to scale, right? They need to be brought to scale, and outlets need to be held accountable based upon these third-party fact-checking entities, right? Currently, those standards are insanely low, and narratives are being pushed far more than facts or, you know, any sort of like message that is nonpartisan. So there's just a lot of money in partisanship right now, right? The amount of undecideds are becoming fewer and fewer, which is insane, because to me, all that says is the amount of intelligent people are somehow decreasing. It's very difficult in my mind to balance being intelligent and then find pride in choosing a party line, right?
Why?
Because I feel like if you're intelligent, then you begin to question things somewhere throughout your life. And through that questioning process, you begin to challenge pride and tribalism, right? I understand wanting to closely identify with something, but both of these parties are so off on delivering some sort of packaged message that I think that, you know, a vast majority of us can get behind. It just seems crazy to identify with pride to something that you may ultimately disagree with, right? And there are, like, here's the thing. Are we going to vote for Biden in November? Sure. But it's a vote against Trump. It's not a vote for this guy. I don't think any of us with any, you know, rational thinking imagine that this guy is going to be a good president. Just like I imagine a lot of the reason why Trump got elected was because it was a vote against Hillary.
Correct.
Right? But there will be Democrats who will rally behind Biden as if he's as if they're his grandfather, simply because he wears blue. And this just doesn't align to me with rational thinking.
Well, the thing is, like, that's part of the party situation where it's like, you got me, I got you. Where it's like, if you don't got me and I win this thing, like,
right,
I might not endorse you on your next run.
Right.
So they're incentivized to. That's why it's like a gang. It's like
it's a giant game of irrational actors, right? So that's ultimately what if like people like Nate Silver, who are great at the predictive model and are doing all of the hard work through the stats and things of that line, if it wouldn't take much, I'm sure, for him to either think in this capacity or know somebody who could begin to map out politics through the lens of game theory. It would be a very short process before they realized it just broke. Because the problem is that the rules aren't finite, right? The rules are bendable and malleable, depending upon what your network looks like and whose back you've scratched. And all of this corruption is just leading to a very unfair system from the bottom up. That's why I'm saying, again, circling all the way back to the message I keep delivering, is at the end of the day, whatever policies we're all voting upon, whenever we get out to the booths and we're trying to put people in power, we need to find those that are willing to disrupt to the point of propping up the floor, not those who are going to give us a fake message of tearing down the top, because that doesn't work, right? That'll always fail because there's too much money at the top to allow that to happen. Anybody who runs for office that says, I'm going to increase capital gains tax and I'm going to increase the tax on the 1% and I'm going to eliminate billionaires in the country. And I'm speaking to Bernie in this instance because I think this is where he fucked up, right? Anybody who runs on that platform is not only doing themselves a disservice, they're being dishonest because there's way too much red tape to allow that to happen. But if you package it and message it in such a way where it's, I'm going to promote policies that are going to take some from those who are empowered in this country. I'm going to reduce the power and the wealth of the absolute top in order to build our bottom and raise the ecosystem of the United States. The country will rally. right? There's no, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. And maybe it'll take a Republican actually to message this way, which will probably never happen.
No.
But in my head, there's no way that middle to upper middle class wouldn't look at that and say, this doesn't affect us at all in the negative. And if anything, it affects us in the positive because now we build a stronger consumer base. Now we build a stronger working class. And all of these are attributes to us in the middle to upper middle class who are trying to rise to the elite, right? Only the elite should be affected. And even they should kind of look at it through the same framework, right? When Bezos looks at that equation, it's just like, okay, fine.
Why is there such a difference then, you think, between people like Bill Gates versus other people that are also billionaires that don't have that same, like they don't feel the same way? Like,
right.
Bill Gates is like, yeah, sure, I don't want to pay a bunch of taxes, but I'll pay them.
Right.
Whereas like other people are like, no, I'm going to move my money to Panama and you're not going to get it.
Gaming the system, right? It's like at the end of the day, most of those people got super wealthy because they were able to win a game.
I'm going to ask you this question. I was having this question, I think, a couple of days ago. In your opinion, do you think there is a billionaire today that got it all clean?
Yeah. Just by law of averages. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I look at a guy.
You hesitated though.
Well, because I just know. I mean, define clean, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. It's like
not stepping on someone else's.
It's similar to what we're talking about with crime, right? Like if you broaden the scope of crime to being so vast that petty theft and purchasing drugs and all this other stuff is considered a crime, then yeah, most everyone's a criminal. Just like if you broaden the scope of what you consider to be clean in making money to include like anything that involves earning off of the loss of someone else, then yeah, nobody became a billionaire cleanly. But I look at a guy like Mark Cuban and I would say that he probably mostly did it right. He may have a couple skeletons in his closet, but I imagine
a little dirty deal on Shark Tank, you know? Never hurt nobody.
Maybe. I guess like my definition would be, how many people became billionaires without corruption.
Right.
And at that point, like, I think it's a low percentage.
I think we have some topics, man, for the rest of the season. We have prison reform. Are billionaires really billionaires?
You need to chill out, man. I don't have this much time to be I need a team.
Newspapers, the fall of newspapers. The real reason why the newspapers have disappeared is because they're owned by hedge funds, and the hedge funds have cut all the employees to increase the margins, and now we're here. It's bad business, man. That's what I'm saying. All right. I'm gonna let you a little bit. I'm gonna let you breathe a little bit. You've been on this for 55 weeks now. I'm going to bring a guest, have some more conversation. I'm sure you guys are well known. High stakes regs battled on TV. One of the first times I saw you on TV was against a Demon Girl, I believe. I think you had Ace Jack in the small blind. I have really crazy memory when it comes to these things. You had a full house. She had Trip Jacks with a Jack 10.
Yeah.
That was like 7 years ago.
True story.
At Reno. Yeah. Huh? Everything. All right. I want to invite high stakes female reg. I'm just going to delete the female. And I'm going to let you all watch a short clip as an introduction. And here we go.
Oh, Diddy.
Oh, damn it.
Mommy want a big pot. What do you say?
Ship it.
Ship it.
Mommy want a big pot. What do you say?
I got my own hype.
Yeah, you have your own hype video.
I'd have demanded to come on the show a lot sooner if I knew that was gonna happen.
You're the first person to ever get a hype video. Berkey doesn't have a hype video.
Nice. I feel honored.
All right. Well, you are the first person that I know that has come out of Minnesota and plays poker, so that already gave you credibility to come on the show. Not only the fact that you play high stakes and you're very well informed about things.
Well, I don't know how. My headphone is yelling at me. I had to hijack my son's computer setup here. This is not my normal office. I was like all ready to go, and then everything went crazy. I couldn't get Skype to work. So, anyways, if you guys have any trouble hearing me, whatever.
Are you on Fortnite right now?
Is that what's happening? Is it my son's? Because I totally hijacked his computer. Is that something's in the background talking to me?
Oh man.
I don't know what's happening right now. I'm like, Easton, help me. All right, are we good? I think I just had to shut up for Fortnite. Are we good?
Yeah, we turned into a gaming podcast as the show came.
It's saying auto shutdown. Here, you guys can be Easton. Easton's the next guest.
That's not. Oh, that's the headphones.
Oh,
so you just had to hit the power button on the headphones. It's not Fortnite. I haven't played Fortnite.
All right, well, they say Fortnite. All right, special guest appearance with Easton. This is my life. This is just super standard.
Remember, turn off Fortnite if your headphones malfunction.
Easton, go away.
I love this. This is amazing.
Yeah, the built-in comedy. This is my life. All right, what was the question? I feel like
there was no question yet. It was we're just talking.
I'm all flustered here.
All right. I want to.
Sorry.
All right. Let's dig into it. So first thing is, I want to bring up a video clip for you to watch. It's by Ava DuVernay. I'll bring up that video clip and then we'll chat about that, as well as like one of the tweets that you put up recently, which had a couple curse words that we won't bleep out, but that's perfectly fine because this is an adult show. So let's watch that video clip and then let's get to talking.
If your concern with the murder of Black people by police can be deterred or shifted because someone is taking a pair of jeans from a Target, then you've got to look at how much you cared about the murder of the Black people by the police to begin with. It's as if I was going to care about Black people being murdered, but that guy took those shoes. So I don't know now. That's how ridiculous it sounds to me.
All right, I'm going to pull up one of your tweets, D-Moon. And I think it's in the same vein, kind of. So if you're more outraged by the rioting and looting than you are of the murder of George Floyd, go fuck yourself. Hashtag sorry not sorry. 854 likes, 79 retweets. One of your more popular tweets recently.
Also one of my more least popular tweets as well. Got a lot of rage coming back at that one, but I expected that, so that's fine.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think, I don't know, people think that they have a right to be upset about like looting or whatever. They don't see it as like two separate things. I mean, and I don't know. I think there's just a lot of ignorant people, and that like the tweet really, it came from, I was actually in Minnesota when the George Floyd incident happened, and like a lot of the conversation in Minnesota, the focus was more on like, I can't believe they looted that Target, and I can't believe that they, burned their stuff down. And this was in the very beginning. This was like before the looting and the rioting even got like big. It was like in the very beginning. And it was really irritating me. I was like, why are we having more conversations about this than we are about the fact that a guy was fucking murdered, like in your state, and this is clearly a problem. And so I found myself just getting like increasingly irritated by the frequency that was where the conversation was, focused on.
So talk to me about the pulse of the state and the pulse of the city in that situation. You're saying most people, did they just like not care, or what?
Well, you have to understand, like, Minnesota's kind of weird because in general, the like Twin Cities metro area is generally very like liberal. And then, where I'm from, it's a more rural community and just a very different vibe, like 60 miles south, surrounded by cornfields, towns of like, my husband grew up in a town of 200 people. I grew up in a town of 2,000 people. So it's very different than like, when you see Minneapolis, St. Paul. So I felt like in the smaller communities, they tend to be a little bit more conservative. And that was where I was when all this happened. So the people that I was interacting with, a lot of their conversations were not about like, how horrible this is. I mean, it was acknowledged it was horrible, but the conversation very quickly would go to like, it's not accomplishing anything for them to, burn things and build things or whatever. so Minnesota's kind of weird because it's like, you know, some parts are very liberal, some are very conservative. I happen to be in the more conservative part, so it's kind of a weird place because it's very split.
Where do you fall, I guess, on the line? Because like you grew up there, your husband grew up there. Where do you fall in that line? Just to like get an idea. Like, are you falling like a little bit more left? Or are you falling?
I definitely fall more towards liberal, but I also can kind of, before I was exposed to poker, like I was more in kind of, I feel like almost a small town Minnesota mentality. So I can see where some of those thought processes are coming from. Because, you know, without my exposure to poker, I think that I probably would have like stayed on that path. That's probably where my mindset would have been as well. But I'm definitely, because of poker, I'm like, I feel like I'm constantly challenged. I'm constantly trying to grow, and I've definitely become more like open-minded, and I would say definitely more on like the liberal spectrum, especially relative to, you know, where I grew up.
So the talk in your town was pretty much like the looting versus, you know, the protests, etc. What about the race issue? Do you find that there is a race issue? Do you find it to be a more economic issue? What, both you and like where you're from, where does that stand?
I mean, yeah, I definitely think there is a race issue. I think that a lot of people where I'm from, they're not even aware that there's as big of a race issue as there is. You know, it's like everyone wants to be like, oh no, it's equal. Like, you know, I have a black friend, you know, and they don't really like understand and see like the, you know, systemic like racism and how, you know, how ingrained it is and just into like our culture and our, you know, police and just economics and everything. So I think that there's generally, you know, sometimes, especially in those small communities, like a lack of understanding of that. And I think that that's one thing that I am proud of myself for, is I think because I understand, I've been there and I understand their thinking because it's kind of the way that I was raised and grew up. But I've also been on the other end where I've been like challenged or whatever. I think that I'm sometimes a good go-between where I can facilitate conversations between both sides. And, you know, that tweet, I almost like, there's a part of me that afterwards I was like, am I just like, instead of engaging in a productive conversation that can actually be helpful, I'm just saying like, go fuck yourself. Like, is that the best way to initiate change? Like, maybe not. It was, you know, at the same time, it came from a place of like legit anger and just like rage tilting, like, go fuck yourself. Like, so yeah, I don't know, but that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it's good. What were some of the feedback? Like, what was some of the feedback that upset you?
I was shocked by how many people were just like took that as me saying fuck the police, or you know, took that as me saying that I don't care about the business owners, you know, and that like wasn't my intention at all. Of course I care about like business owners. Like, of course I'm, you know, sorry that somebody who's worked, you know, to have something in their life is like that's damaged. And, you know, no, I don't like wish that on anybody. I don't, and I'm not saying that that's like, you know, yeah, you should just go out and like burn buildings, you know. But I think that focusing on that is just taking away from the much bigger issue. And also I think that there's a place where like, who's to say how people grieve and they rage in their own ways. And like, I don't know what they're experiencing. I haven't been discriminated against my entire life and told that I'm not as valuable as somebody else. Like, I don't know what that feels like. So I don't know what the proper outlet for that is. And I don't feel like I don't feel like other people should be saying that. But I got a lot of people who would just like took it as me being like, oh, you know, yeah, fuck the business owners, fuck those guys. Like, you know, and that's not at all what I was trying to say.
What's your stance on that? Like the discriminating, like there's a lot of women in poker that feel like they're discriminated in poker. Have you ever felt that way? I feel like you just like hang as like one of the guys, but I'm not necessarily sure.
Yeah, I feel like I should be careful answering this question because I personally don't feel like I feel like I've had generally very positive experiences in poker. You know, my outlook is very positive. I think that in the higher stakes, there's almost a different set of like standards that are usually upheld versus what I've seen in like lower stakes. Like, I think a woman in playing lower stakes is more likely to get harassed or, you know, and not have somebody stand up for her or whatever than what I personally, you know, am likely to experience in a high stakes cash game. I also think that my personality, I just have kind of a strong personality. And so I think that men tend to not just like give me as much shit as they maybe would another woman, because I'm pretty good at just, you know, throwing it back. So yeah, I think that my experience hasn't been that so much. There have been, certain circumstances here and there, but overall not as much. But I mean, I definitely do think it does exist in poker. I've heard some stories from other women of, I just personally hasn't affected me as much.
Right. Okay. I wanna ask you a couple things. The police with the, some of the conversation after, like once you get off, will be about defunding the police. I'm not necessarily sure where you stand on that. So effectively defunding the police, there's a lot of stances, effectively reducing the budget of the police and then putting it towards other things. So where do you stand on that? And then we could just talk about, COVID and poker and like when you're going to start playing live again, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that there needs to be like definitely like some sort of like reform. I worry a little bit about defund the police because I feel like that's almost something that people hear that and they're like, oh, they're gonna like dismantle the police, we're not gonna have police, and then they go into like, it's like, I feel like it's an opportunity for people to play on other people's fears and use that for political gain. But I definitely think the idea of clearly we need better training. Like our police officers, they need better training. We need more accountability, like more screening, things like that. Like manager like skills to like de-escalate situations instead of just be the one that's like escalating. Like these are basic things that police officers, it needs to be like drilled and drilled and drilled. And obviously we're not doing that. So yeah, I mean, I love the idea of, hey, maybe let's like take some money from our fucking riot gear and maybe we can use that for some more like psychological training and, shit like that, because clearly what we're doing is not working. I don't know how, Minneapolis, they said they're like, I don't know what their technical phrase was. They're like,
dismantling, yeah,
dismantling the police force or whatever. I worry about that. Again, like I said, I feel like I worry that it could almost be like too far, and also let's like make rational decisions. Let's not like make emotional ones because people like I just want to see like some evidence. Like what does that look like? What does that mean? What is your plan? How are you going to do that?
Do you feel like, I know your husband is, I believe he's a teacher, or in wrestling, right? So do you feel as if at least the teaching budget is simply just like not high enough, and like does in your household, like, are those conversations ever had?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that for like us to attract people to teaching, we need to have, why would you, my husband and I, when we were like in college, we were both going to college to be teachers. And had that happened, had we continued down that path, like we were basically probably accepting a life of, we save a little bit, we live very modestly, we maybe, if we're lucky, go on one vacation a year, but essentially like, I don't want to say like economic hardship but we're definitely not going to be like flourishing, We're accepting that we're not going to be wealthy people by both of us being teachers. And, teachers aren't in it for, a ton of money. And I don't think anybody's going to be going into that profession because they're like super financially motivated. But at the same time, you shouldn't have to sacrifice a life of like comfort for, So, I mean, yeah, I think it's, how are we supposed to get good teachers and how are we supposed to do that without throwing money into like education? And then you just look at so many things in our like world that could be fixed by better education, but how does that start if we don't have the money for it? I just feel like we allocate our resources in, a lot of wrong places.
Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about poker. So some of the games have started running at Venetian. So I see like some 1020, 2040 running at Venetian. What's your take on starting live games? Obviously, you are involved in the live scene plenty. Are you thinking about getting in there, running some games, obviously once like Aria or the Wynn start opening?
I'm just not in a big hurry to return to live poker. Honestly, this is almost this like quarantine, whatever, has kind of like give me time to like step back and I've kind of had some reflection on if that's even what I like forever want to do. I've lost a little bit of like my passion for it, I guess. So I'm definitely not really in a hurry. I haven't missed it much. I gotta be honest. I've missed like the people, but the poker and like the politics that now go into poker and all that, it gets exhausting. And so, no, I'm not in a huge hurry. Honestly, I'm kind of just like chilling right now. And I'm kind of, I'm sorry this all happened. I'm sorry that whatever, but personally, like this has been just a little nice, like reset for me.
It was a good pause. You're saying like, it was just a good pause from like the whole scene.
Yeah, it was a good pause and I'm not really ready to hit the play button yet.
How about your online? Like, I know you started running some like online games. How has that gone?
That's actually been really fun. That's something that I've done. Is I do like a twice weekly Zoom game, and we play all sorts of like stupid shit. Like, I mean, 25-cent, 50-cent, 5-card double board PLO. Like, nobody has any clue what they're doing, you know. But it's nice because some of the guys that, you know, the people that join that Zoom call weekly, a couple of them are like immunocompromised. They like literally have not been out of their house or whatever, and they really look forward to like the socialization. So that's been fun. And then, you know, I do play in like one other private game on like a app or whatever that runs pretty frequently. I can play as much as I want, and I play it, but not nearly as much as I probably should, or most people would, because it's a good game. But I only play maybe once a week. I've just been kind of like taking the time to chill out, hang with the family. You know, like I said, just kind of pause. I'm kind of a little bit over poker right now. I'm not gonna lie.
That's weird. I thought, like, because, you know, before COVID, you were playing like pretty frequently, right? You were playing all the time.
Yeah, I was playing a ton, and you know, it's like I said, the private game scene and whatever, and that's just a very like kind of can be very like cutthroat political environment, and that's exactly what I don't really like miss. It's just it got to be like a lot. So yeah, it's just been a nice.
It's a lot. I mean, you and I have had some conversations about it. It's definitely a lot. Yeah. Okay, so that's cool. No poker. I think that's kind of nice.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's kind of nice. And like I said, I don't know.
So in the online,
first time in my entire life, I'm considering the idea of like doing something other than poker. Like maybe not immediately, but I'm kind of like opening my mind to the idea of like.
What would that look like for you?
I honestly don't know. I really don't know. Like.
I feel like fitness is like a very natural transition for you.
Yeah, I like fitness, but I don't know. I've got like the nursing degree. I'm really interested in like mental health nursing. The problem is that I've never had a schedule. Like I don't mind the work, but I like. You know, I've always had my independence. I've never had somebody be like, no, you have to be at work this time and this time, this time. And like, I think that would be a tough adjustment for me. But I mean, that's real life. You know, I can't sit here and complain. Like most people have jobs, have done this forever. And, you know, and I don't know, maybe I'll just find myself back to poker. I'm just kind of in a weird, like, starting to consider the idea of something else.
You've always been good to me in poker. That's for sure. There was a night where I was like, hey, I need to borrow like $30,000.
Don't tell people that. People are gonna be like, "Yo, D-Moon, can I get some money?"
And that was funny. I was like, well, I don't have money here, but I need money.
You're gonna get me in trouble with my husband. In fairness, let's full disclosure, there was like multiple vouchers and whatever, including Berkey himself. So
yeah, for sure. But
that's
still,
like my husband and I because poker, you just like. We just throw our money like whatever, and you borrow, whatever, and you get a little bit immune to that. And I feel like you almost have to be kind of like remove yourself from the attachment to the money a little bit, so I can get But for my husband, he's like busting his balls for a job, and he's like, you just borrowed half my income, like what?
I know. I mean, that was like the first time we've like exchanged that large sum of money, so. Yeah. I made sure that like you didn't have to ask me for it, and you didn't even have to come to me. Like I went to you, gave you back the money immediately.
It was great. And like again, I was never uncomfortable with it, but it is kind of funny because it's just something that like in our world that's just kind of I wouldn't say standard, but it certainly happens a lot more than when my husband's a damn teacher and he's like, what the fuck? What? Like this is not normal. Like this, Like,
why'd you lend that Spanish kid $30,000? You crazy?
It's kind of nice. That keeps me in check, honestly.
So the game, like I know you let everyone into your online game. Tell people a little bit about that. Maybe they probably want to sign up.
Yeah, no, I mean it's like one of those clubs. We play on King's Club or whatever. And I've been doing it. We were doing it Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, but I'm gonna pull back to Thursday, Saturday. Do it at 5 p.m. And yeah, everybody is welcome. Even people like we always put, can hit me up on social media, whatever. We give out the Zoom chat, so even if people don't want to play, like, or some people are kind of sketched out by like the apps and depositing, whatever, and I totally get that. That's cool. But a lot of people just show up just to hang out, socialize. I have some guests on there. I'm going on vacation with Dave Tuckman and his family next week, and we're gonna Zoom together, whatever. But yeah, we just play like stupid games. Sometimes 25 cents, 50 cents. Sometimes 1-2. Every once in a while, like 2-5. Might even go on. Screw on 5 cent 10s. It's just whatever people want to do.
Yeah, it's just a chill environment. You're not really trying to like make money.
Yeah, I would say it gives me some structure to my week, which is something that when we first went into quarantine, I was like, which is weird because at Poker Player we don't have structure anyways, but it just felt like every single day was like the same. It felt like it was like, what, you know, so just having something that's like, okay, so this is scheduled, like, you know, it helped me mentally. And I think it was a lot of the people who joined the Zoom call, they've been like super appreciative of just, you know, same thing, something to do.
So we talk a lot about, you know, before I let you go, we talk a lot about fitness in this podcast. In fairness, like, you're probably one of the people that, like, when I was like first like struggling with fitness, like, you were just like, oh, you just gotta like show up, do it. I remember one of the first games I played with you, I was like, yeah, man, like, I'm really struggling with this fitness, and you're like, well, what you gonna do about it? And I was like, damn, all right, D-Moon, chill out. I was like trying to play the 7-8 suited, I'm getting yelled at by D-Moon. And what are your fitness goals currently? Do you have any fitness goal? I see your stories sometimes, like, you're just like really getting after it.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I put on like 10 pounds during quarantine too. Like, we have a gym, we like working out or whatever, but like, I'm not even gonna lie, I drank a lot. I was just like, I'm kind of bored. My one glass of wine, you know, turned into like, okay, I'm gonna have a bottle of wine, you know. I drank a lot in the last couple of months, which I'm not concerned about, like, in any, you know, way, shape, or form. It's fine. It just was like I'm bored, something to do, but wasn't very good for the fitness. Definitely scaling back on that now. And also, like, I'm somebody who I need to be like in a group. Like, I do, you know, CrossFit or whatever, and a lot of people are like, oh, I gotta talk about CrossFit. Yeah. But it has been something that has been like life changing for me. It's the first thing I've ever done fitness wise that I wasn't bored by, and like, it's just constantly like changing. And like I said, you know, like I told you, you just have to like show up. So like, I love that. Like, I show up for an hour, I get a full workout, I feel good, you know, I can most part like eat when I want and not get too fat, you know. So right now my fitness goals are just to like, I'm kind of in the re-punishing myself for letting myself go this last couple months. I just started going back to classes this week. So cool. My goals right now are just to show up. I mean, and kind of get myself back to where I was, where, you know, my sweatpants are a little more stretchy than they used to be.
That's cool. Nah, all right. I really appreciate you coming on. Don't be a stranger. I feel as if like I see you like once every 2 months, and then, but I mean, in fairness, like, we haven't seen anybody in the last couple months, so.
Yeah. No, we have like a lot of social circles that kind of like overlap. So it is, I don't know. I feel like the older I get, the more like reclusive I get. I'm kind of like becoming more introverted. So, but I agree. And all the interactions that we've ever had have always been positive. It was, but like too, like Matt.
The best interaction was like our first interaction where you and your husband put me upside down on a keg stand. And that was that was the first interaction. I've never done a keg stand before, and that was my first interaction with you.
That's awesome. I will always have that. As will you. And
some grilled cheese. That was. I think I
ended up making. That was like Dan O'Brien's party, and I think I was like cooking eggs for everybody because it was the only thing that we could find in the house. Because it was Berkey obviously had 1,000 eggs in the house, and we were all hungry and drunk at like 2 a.m. And I was like in my bikini at 2 a.m. like flipping eggs. In the kitchen, just like there's like an assembly line of people. That was great. It was such a fun party.
Yeah, we need to bring that back. Hopefully after COVID there'll be some keg stands and grilled cheeses and some 5, 10, 10 cents, no limit hold'em.
I'm in, I'll make the eggs.
All right, thank you, D-Moon. The best part of this conversation is that Berkey didn't get to say a word, and that was good.
Well done. I will have special thanks to my son for letting me hijack his computer. He was not super excited about it.
I appreciate you. All right, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That was a nice it chilled things off, you know?
Sure.
You got to go on your phone, you got to hit up some shorties, got to see what's up for tonight, see where the party's at.
What do you think, I'm 21?
I feel like you got a lot of shorties.
I have homeschool to teach, man.
Damn, that's almost coming up. Yeah, we got another hour and a half. All right. So what'd you think about what D-Moon said in terms of like people didn't really care about, they don't even see the racism, and also like just slightly moving away from the metropolitan area, people are just like solely focused on the looters. I know we spoke about this before, but like, do you think that it's just like a metropolitan thing, or like what's going on?
It's an economic thing, man. It's always an economic thing. Like, it got framed as a political thing of being conservative versus liberal, but it's not. It's money versus not money. Cities are rich, rural is poor, right? So when rural people see expensive things get destroyed, they react and they say, why would you do such a thing? They value material goods because they don't have material goods. It doesn't make sense to me that, I shouldn't say that. No, actually, I am going to say that. It doesn't make sense to me that rural America leans conservative when, in a general sense, the policies from the conservative side take the most advantage of rural America.
Yeah, I know you've been making this argument about like, why do the right side want the police unions, and it doesn't make any sense.
Oh, this is a huge contradiction, right? Liberal America is super for unions. Conservative America is super against unions, except when it involves police. For some reason, like when you're talking about authority and utilizing the military in some sort of capacity, it flips. And I mean, I guess that makes sense to some degree if you scale all the way up to military, because right leans heavily into being a militant nation, that war hawks and effectively our number one outsourced commodity is our military. Mm-hmm. Where liberal America leans a lot towards pacifying things and wants to defund the military, and this escalates downward. But yeah, I mean, I think, God, I hope anyway, that this battle of contradiction, where a side that is very anti-union is very pro-police union, and a side that's very pro-union is very anti-police union, will somehow demonstrate some of the hypocrisies that we see through policy, that we see through party lines. And maybe, just maybe, rational thinking will prevail and we'll recognize that there are flaws to both of these lines of logic.
I'm going to take some more notes on future shows of contract military.
No.
What do you want?
I don't have anything to say about any of these things. I don't know enough.
All right. There's one last thing, though. Doesn't matter if you know or not. We're going to talk about one last thing. I think it's kind of important, just because the tonality of things have generally changed. I think some people feel as if the police is being mistreated here in this entire thing. Mm-hmm. And I want to play the New York City police chief's video. He did I would say, a speech for the media. And I want to play his video generally in full. It's like about 80 seconds or so. And I want to kind of get our reactions to it. And then I will ask a couple more questions. So let's play that police chief video.
This isn't stained by someone in Minneapolis. It's still got a shine on it. And so do theirs. So do theirs. Stop treating us like animals and thugs, and start treating us with some respect. That's what we're here today to say. We've been left out of the conversation. We've been vilified. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. Trying to make us embarrassed of our profession. 375 million interactions. Overwhelmingly positive. Nobody talks about all the police officers that were killed in the last week in the United States of America, and there were a number of them. We don't condone Minneapolis. We roundly reject what he did as disgusting. It's disgusting. It's not what we do. It's not what police officers do. Our legislators abandoned us. The press is vilifying us. Well, you know what, guys? I'm proud to be a cop. And I'm going to continue to be proud to be a cop until the day I retire. And that's all I have to say.
Looked like he was coming back to the mic to say some more stuff. All right. There is another video that coincides with this video that I almost used, but I kind of was like, nah, chill. Effectively, and it's gone viral, it's his speech cut. And every time he makes a point, it goes into a
counterpoint.
Right. but like a counter action.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah. So, okay.
I'm glad you didn't use that other video. It's propaganda.
Yeah, I didn't use. I mean,
no, I get it. It's not that it's.
I mean,
it's not that it's not exemplifying a point, because you're right. He says a lot of things that are not exactly true, but it's also a little bit misleading,
right?
To demonstrate.
I thought that, like, what is he trying to say, man? Like, we should feel sorry for him. Like, sorry.
I empathize with them. I mean, I think that they are a part of a broken system, and it's unfortunate because there's a layer of pride that is attributed to these professions, right? We hold in high regard our military, our firemen, our police officers. You know, their shield says to protect and serve, and they are meant to be the good Samaritans. I saw, I still follow my cop friend, and he posted something that said, it's in our creed to fight the bad guy. Therefore, by default, the actions we're currently taking have to be true, right? And basically implying that if they're acting with force against these crowds, it's because it's deserved. And so, like, I empathize with their message because they're following orders in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, they are just a byproduct of their culture. They are, I mean, that entire speech was the embodiment of tribalism on display. The police officers are tribalistic by nature. They view it as a them versus us type of lens where it's easy to point to the stats and say, like, the overwhelming majority of them are positive. Yes, that's true. The overwhelming majority of Americans are not in jail. That doesn't mean that the 2.4 million that are in jail deserve to be there. And it doesn't mean that the, maybe 5 or 7 million Americans aren't being harassed, right? So it's very unfortunate because, his passion is born out of what he's been conditioned into for decades. And he just can't see the forest through the trees. It's impossible. And it's unfortunate because somebody who is capable of seeing the forest through the trees in that position of power can actually relegate change throughout the culture. But he's just furthering along the same message that we've already heard. He says we roundly dismiss what happened in Minnesota as being repugnant, right? And then he follows it up and says, that's not us. We don't do that. Do you remember Eric Gardner? It wasn't that long ago. Literally, the "I can't breathe" quote came from Eric Gardner on the streets of New York City.
Yeah, for sure.
Those cops were never prosecuted. So it's not a matter of how often does violent acts occur between the police and the civilians. It's how often are the cops held accountable that engage in these violent acts. And now when we start to talk about immunity and the power that the police union holds over the political realm, over the citizens that it's policing and things of that nature, there are just zero checks and balances in place. So that's why you're being vilified. That's why your legislatures have abandoned you, because we have no other recourse to keep you in check. So, police officers are taking one on the chin right now, but they deserve to, right? They're not acting with the benefit of the collective in mind. They're acting in accordance to what they've been trained to do. They're just following orders. They're simply foot soldiers. And I don't want to dismiss people that have taken on the path of military or law enforcement or whatever the case may be, because it's not their fault. It's the laws that are in place that are at fault.
So there's been a lot of talk about defund the police. That, I introduced it briefly talking to D Moon. I want to play a video because I don't think a lot of people really even understand what that means. Like, what does defund the police even mean? It's like, are we taking away all the money? Are we taking away part of the money? Effectively. So there's 2 videos. The first video is a pretty good one. I think it connects the dots pretty well. Ironically, I'm gonna say that term because I think it's a good one to kind of introduce, you'll see what I'm saying when it gets there. So let's play the Connect the Dots video first, and then we'll get into Maya Wiley, who is a former U.S. District Attorney, who's going to talk about the budgets. So let's play the Connect the Dots video.
As protests continue, there is a growing call to defund the police. But how would that work, and what are activists really asking for? Let's connect the dots. The idea of defunding police is actually not new. Calls for money to be pulled from police departments started to grow after protests against police brutality in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. But it was treated as a radical idea that didn't gain much traction. Now, as a spotlight once again shines on racial inequality, calls to defund law enforcement are growing louder. So does the idea actually mean disbanding police? That kind of depends on who you ask. Some activists are calling for their budgets to be slashed and the money to be reallocated to social services. Others want all funding to be removed and departments dissolved. The idea being that communities of color often don't feel protected by police and rely more on community and community services to stay safe. And that is connecting the dots.
All right. So I want to get right into, before we even, have more to talk about, the budgets. And that's really what we're talking about here. Like, there's just a disparity in terms of budgets. So I want to play Maya Wiley's video on the budgets, and then we can have a conversation.
If you just look at the New York City Police Department, which is the largest in the country by far, twice as large as the FBI, it literally has seen a 22% increase in budget, as I understand it, over the last 4 years. And we have had historic low violent crime rates for years. And just to give you one practical example, it means that in New York City, we have, say, 5,500 public safety officers in schools. They're on their police department personnel. We have only 560 school psychologists. But we have 1.1 million children, including over 100,000 of those who are homeless. So part of what people are saying is we're not spending our resources wisely.
Those are pretty big numbers. Million children, 100,000 homeless, 500 psychologists.
Yeah.
That's not enough.
Right.
Like, it's just, whoa. I mean, okay. All right. So I think the call to action is simply to the legislative is like, there's just too much money being allocated to police, and we need to move things in other directions and see if that solves the disparity problem.
Yeah, that may be what we see, but that's not the problem. Mm-hmm. The problem is the power being allocated to the police, right? So the power of the police union is what allows it to get all this excessive funding. Mm-hmm. It's what allows it to be so difficult to penetrate whenever it comes to holding police accountable. It's what allows for the immunity that's negotiated, mm-hmm. right? All of this stuff is taking place due to the power and strength of the police union. If you want to, quote unquote, defund the police, if you want to reallocate these sources, if you want to have those who are signing up to protect and serve be held under more stringent guidelines, have more encompassing training, be subjected to more mental health training, or maybe even at least mental health, I guess, like testing, right? To ensure, because like I think, again, this is sensationalized, but I think I just saw something recently where a police officer was found out to be running a white supremacist group mm-hmm. in his spare time, right? And it's like, even with that type of information available, it becomes very difficult to fire that person, right? So all of these things embody the deeper issue, and that is we are just too subjective to the power of the actual unionization of these police forces. Mm-hmm. So yeah, don't start with the defunding. We're shining a light on the wrong problem, right? The funding will then be reallocated after the union's broken up. Once you take that power away from the police and they lose a lot of that leverage, now, number one, it'll be less attractive to be a police officer, which is not a bad thing, right? It's just like the conversation you had with D-Mood about teaching. If there's a layer of passion necessary in order to become a teacher, it stands to reason you'll be a better teacher. Now, there's a counterpoint to that. If you're not financially motivated and if, you feel like you have a better path forward in other realms because you'll have a higher quality of life, then we're going to lose our best and brightest that could have otherwise been teachers. And that's fair. And
you just need to pay them fairly.
Right.
And then the passion will push forward.
Right. Yeah. And the same will hold true for police officers, right? If we put more stringent metrics around what it takes to be a cop, we can compensate them better, right? Because now it's a much more selective task force. And it's being stringently tested and stress tested and put through de-escalation training. And, I saw a stat, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I think on average, the world's police force is something like 6 months plus of training. And ours is something like 8 to 10 weeks.
Wow.
And we're one of the few police forces in the world that are armed. So it's just like, this is an insane thing. Of course, everybody else is going through de-escalation training. They're not weaponized.
Yeah.
So I think really this is a root cause analysis type of thing where if we recognize that the true sore spot here is how militant and powerful the police are, and then maybe even taking it a step further, re-examining the laws that they're truly enforcing. All of that gets... Like once you start to blow up that portion of the system, all the ancillary problems that are plaguing us, over budgeting and being underfunded for mental health, being underfunded for child services and other social programs and stuff like that, they all reap the rewards. So essentially, the thoughts would be that the community would benefit long term from a more precise sort of solution, which just basically involves, taking some power away from law enforcement.
Let's play the video from Camden. I think that's a starting point where I think a lot of people are using that example. Obviously, it's one example isolated to one city, but I think people want to take portions of that and potentially implement it. And, now that Minneapolis has disbanded their police, I think they're going to look to Camden to see how they rebuild. So let's play Camden's video and take it from there.
This was a scene last week out of Camden, which is in New Jersey. Police, they're marching arm in arm with protesters in the wake of George Floyd's death. Camden, which is just outside of Philadelphia, was long considered dangerous, but that perception has changed. Camden switched to community policing in 2013 after a huge spike in homicides. According to this article in Bloomberg Business Week in 2013, the mayor and city council dissolved the local police department and signed an agreement for the county to provide shared services. That doubled the size of their old force. Police also got de-escalation training, body cameras, and a very strict use of force policy. According to the department, reports of excessive force complaints in Camden have dropped 95% since 2014. The police in Camden are also more mindful of over-pursuing petty offenses. Department spokesperson says, "We know when we police a city that has 30% of the residents under the poverty line, a $400 speeding ticket or ticket in general would be absolutely devastating financially."
That's pretty fair. I mean, that last fact I thought was pretty considerate. It's they're not just gonna nitpick every single thing, especially when they know the target is people that don't have money. You speeding to the airport, they're gonna get you.
They got me.
I know. I was there. But someone that 30% of the population's on the poverty line, that $400 ticket's pretty bad.
Yeah.
It could be devastating in terms of it throws off potentially months of income, and it scales down the line. Now, the kid doesn't have enough food, etc. Things continue to pile on. What I found interesting too is that they doubled the force, the number of people that they had, while de-escalating the amount of complaints of use of excessive force. I think that's like pretty good, and that came from de-escalating, which is like what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things to note. So I did a fair amount of reading on Camden yesterday to prepare for this. First and foremost, like by them dissolving their police force, what they're effectively saying is they dissolved the police union, right? They obviously still have a police presence.
Correct.
It's just not under the usual constructs of a municipal.
Correct. So they just to, you're saying they fired and rehired, correct?
Under different
terms.
Yes, under like different contracts. So effectively, they become a community activist group that possesses the power of police, but they lack the union representation. And because of that, they're obviously trained differently because they're held to a different standard now. So they don't have protected immunity. They don't have these luxuries that other unions have bargained for. So what ultimately happened was there is something known as a broken window policy. And this started in the Reagan administration. It was basically an idea where if you dissolve small crime, you'll prevent big crime, right? So basically, like if the writing's on the wall and you're not paying attention to it, you're susceptible to a bigger problem, right? So if you're in a high crime neighborhood where there's a bunch of petty theft and all these small crimes taking place, it's likely that you're going to see escalation.
Okay.
What they're operating is what the true definition of a broken window policy is. So rather than punishing all these petty crimes, right, they're just basically tasking the community to be their eyes and, kind of, I don't want to say tattle, but like basically they're asking the community to point out quote unquote broken windows as they occur or petty crime as it occurs. And then they're parsing it as a force to say, okay, this has legs and, we've seen this happening a lot in this particular area. Let's increase our presence there a little bit, yada, yada, yada. But they're not persecuting the actual petty crimes themselves, right? They're just trying to allocate their resources in accordance to where patterns are consistently occurring. And it's based upon the community kind of being their watch in some efforts, right? So that leads into why they're also not overly policing things like traffic tickets, and right. It's so what I came across in my Camden was the poorest county in the entire nation.
Yeah,
in all of the United States in 2013.
I remember that.
They're still one of the poorest, but their increase their economics have continually increased gradually. So there has been benefits, right? And their crime rate has gradually decreased. Effectively, this seems like a good sample of one to point to and say, like, this may have legs. But again, it's very important to represent what problems we're trying to solve and really shine a light on whether or not they're being achieved, right? So what I thought was a little bit misleading about that clip was it was making it seem like a lack of police presence was making the neighborhood more safe. What I would prefer is a demonstration.
Why'd you say that? They increased the force by 2x.
Right, but then all of the highlights were on less, was on de-escalation, was on less police enforcement of petty crime. Effectively, it was framing it out, the message of less policing equals a happier community.
I see.
And that may or may not be true, but I think we're going to have a hard time finding data to like hard back it. What we can find data on, though, is how that police force performs compared to a unionized one. And I think it's much more probable that we'll be able to draw parallels and say this police force that has been forced now under more stringent credentials and more stringent judgment based on the actions that they take, based on the protocols that they follow, et cetera, down the line, is massively outperforming these other areas where the police force is unionized.
Police unions. Next week.
I'm pretty sure John Oliver's covered all of these topics.
I don't care what John. This is our show. Okay. Sure. I don't care what John Oliver does behind the paywall of HBO. This is about Spotify.
This isn't
about John Oliver.
Sure.
This isn't about Trevor Noah. This isn't about Hasha. What?
Sure. Just say the Patriot Act.
What's his name?
Hassan.
Yeah. I know. Just fucking with him. I didn't really know. I know it was either Hashan or Hassan, but I just tried to mix both at the same time. No, okay, fine, whatever. I don't care. Prison reform, police unions. Next week.
I'm not trying to be John Oliver.
You're not trying to be John Oliver, but you're trying to have an opinion. That's all.
I'm happy to keep my opinion to myself. I'd rather speak about things that
We ran out of topics.
For sure knowledgeable on.
Okay. There's no more topics. Break. That's it. It's all gone. That means we come to the end of the show. Congratulations. You've made it.
Thanks.
Through the hot seat. What do you want to talk about next week?
I don't know, man. I don't know. This topic makes me sad.
It's about cruise lines. You ever been on a cruise?
Yeah.
You don't want to be in those maritime laws, man. I'm telling you, they're not fun.
You've just been watching a whole lot of Patriot Act, haven't you?
I'm going to watch. No, it's everywhere. I watched the Patriot Act, and then I was like, wait, is this real? So if I go to DR on a cruise, I'm dead. It's not fun, man.
Yeah, sure.
It's a crazy thing, man. We could talk about vaccines. Did you get a vaccine? You got a flu vaccine?
Of course.
Of course?
Yeah.
I don't know much about the vaccine. Talk to me about it. Is it good?
Well, I mean, vaccines are preventative so that we don't have these outbreaks.
Why everybody say vaccines are bad?
Because they're idiots. They're literally idiots. Like, to say I'm not going to vaccinate my kid for mumps, measles, and rubella, it's literally saying, like, I want to go back to the old days when people just died. Like, we haven't reached herd immunity on these things at all. Vaccinations allow us to circumvent that.
What's tuberculosis? What is that?
I don't know.
I always had to get that shot. I always had to get that shot. I couldn't even go to school without getting that shot.
Yeah. It's highly contagious.
Really?
I think it's a respiratory disease, but I'm not positive.
I know. I hated shots.
Just your kids will take a COVID-19 vaccine. And there will be some crazy mom who says, I'm not vaccinating my kid.
Wow. Be careful. We're going to have to clip that one out.
I don't give a shit.
We're going to have to clip that one out. Why can't it be a crazy dad? You see? That's how you get in trouble, Berkey.
Because I'm thinking specifically of Jenny McCarthy.
I'm trying to get that Spotify, you know? So. All right. Well, a lot of topics. Next week, we'll talk about Berkey playing 100, 200 online. That seems like it. Well, maybe we'll bring a hand. Something like that. For people to enjoy, man. People want to,
Why does every topic we talk about make me sad?
Yeah. What do you want to talk about? I try to throw you layups. I throw you women at the club. You don't bite. What do you want me to do, man? I try every episode. There's one topic.
Talk about Berkey playing high stakes and running it up, then running it down.
Yeah, well,
I'll talk about that. That's fine.
I don't create the story. I just tell the story.
You just report it.
I don't create the story. I don't like saying I'm a reporter. I'm not a fucking reporter. I am a show.
Sure.
With that said, I'm glad you all joined us. Thank you, D Moon Girl. Thank you to production. Thank you to all watching. Thank you who will watch on the replay. Thank you who hates us. Thank you to all of us. Thank you, my mom. Thank you to everyone. And like, subscribe, follow, tell your friends. See you later.